Hi, Michael. Welcome to the NTM Growth Marketing Podcast. I'm excited to be speaking with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Well, one of the first things that caught my attention was the just depth and expertise of marketing know-how you've accumulated over the years. So I love for you just to brag on yourself a little bit and share a little bit more about your marketing background and what you're currently up to in the space.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I generally like to tell my story like that in about three chapters. I think of it as a reinvention story, right? Because my chapter one, which I'll call the music years, I used to work in the music industry, actually doing sales and sales management. And I love doing that because I'm passionate about music. You can see the piano behind me. And that was great. But towards the tail end of that, I actually started getting more and more involved with the company I was working for at the time's internet sales and learning how are they marketing it. And I was like getting very deeply entrenched in that. And when that company closed due to it was the economic turmoil of 2008 did them in. I had to like look to reinvent myself, and I was like, I'm really enjoying marketing, and I jumped teams. And so when I did that, I kind of had to restart. That's my chapter two, where I restarted and started working for agencies. I did that for about 13 years. I worked for a couple different agencies, some specializing in like SEO and link building. One was specializing in finance marketing. And then one in had a couple of different verticals, but like manufacturing, SaaS, elective medical, things like that. And what I started to realize is that even though I had this deep understanding of SEO, and because I started there, I really loved expanding my knowledge base. And so I started to cross train in everything, like, social media, paid ads, even leadership, because I wanted to be a marketing leader. And I was not at that level. I had been a leader in sales. I'd never been a leader in marketing. Um, and so at a certain point, then I started also doing consulting, right? I had a lot of expertise in one thing. I started consulting in that thing as like a side hustle. And I'll come back to that, but that also started to grow. And then my chapter three is I lived in New York for most of that, and we had to move to Florida. And I after a little bit of time in Florida, I actually ended up working in-house for a company as the lead marketer, and they were a health tech B2B SaaS company. Did that for a number of years. And that was really great too. I mean, there was certainly a lot of changes during that period of time. You had COVID, you had AI innovation, and you had like all the SaaS layoffs going on. And during that, I started to see this opportunity with the consulting that I was doing as well to be like, well, I have a lot to give. And because of these things, there's a lot of people that need help, especially because I had been through the company I was working for, dabbling in a lot of AI work before ChatGPT came to market. And so, I mean, I dove right into ChatGPT as well, and I've expanded my knowledge base there. But that kind of those three parts were basically my reinvention story kind of ended, right? As soon as I then took the jump into now being a fractional CMO. And now this is either my chapter four or my sequel book. Now I'm on this journey as a fractional marketing leader. And so it's been really great so far. I'm continuing to work with a lot of companies in health tech, B2B SaaS, things like that. But I still have some clients, like consulting clients that I've been working for since way back when, that are focused in the SEO space, link building, PR, digital PR. And then I've also moved more into some healthcare opportunities around mental health, behavioral health, autism, because I'm a huge advocate of world autism awareness. So that's kind of what I've got my hands in right now, is those variety of different things. And that brings us full circle.
How did your sales background make you a better marketer?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think that it's not, I wouldn't think of it as it necessarily made me a better marketer, but it did make me better at speaking to clients, doing presentations, understanding people's pain points and how you might solve them with marketing. So I think that it certainly helped me, like messaging, language for sure, right? Like,
Mhm.
because you learn how to talk to people. You learn the concept of good, better, best, and all of those things. And sometimes really a lot of that is just things that help you, I think, internally, right? Because if you're working with people at the executive leadership level, you have to, certainly have a good understanding of how to communicate well. And then I think once you are a leader, I mean, there's certainly a lot of that with the team that you manage, right? So just, I think being a good salesman also means you just are really good at communicating in most cases. And that's always going to help you no matter what you're doing.
When I was in college, one of my professors who had an actual business background, he wasn't, just in academia his whole life, he was a CEO of a publicly traded company. He told us one of the best first jobs you could have out of college was to work in sales. And at the time, I thought that was, below me for whatever, egotistical reason. But in hindsight, and also rejection. And
Yeah.
that kind of influences my next question is around the idea of split testing. And in digital marketing there's just so much experimentation. It's not 1970s or whatever and you're just putting up a big billboard and it's one and done, that better work. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to just split testing and failing as a marketer?
Yeah, I love the billboard analogy because I've used that myself several times. Um, but in doing testing, one of my principles is if you're not testing, you're not learning. You should always be testing, even if it's the simplest bit of copy in a A/B test, right? Homepage, 50% of it sees it say one thing, other 50% sees it say the other thing. And I think that's super important because you always have to be, as if you're like deeply entrenched in marketing and you really want to improve and optimize like all these buzzwords you hear people say all the time, you have to be testing in order to do it. You have to like playing with the knobs. And so I went through a course actually at one of the agencies I worked for where they brought in this Harvard professor to teach statistical analysis so that you could base your A/B testing off statistical significance to make sure that when you're making a final determination, it's baked in data, right? And I have carried that with me ever since. I think that's super important because most people see early results and they have a knee-jerk reaction to wanting to make a
Mhm.
change when it hasn't hit a level of statistical significance. So that's a buzzword I like to use when doing tests and making sure people understand like we're not changing the test until we know that it's hitting that mark. Um, and you have to also set up a framework, right? Like, what do you hope to learn from this test? Like, if I learn that one piece of copy is better than the other piece of copy, what are the metrics that are really telling me that? And
Mhm.
then what is, you have your hypothesis, and then what are you going to do with the result of that test? Are you going to make a permanent change? And for some website changes, for example, that might take time, resources, budget, and you have to plan for that, right? You can't just run the test, say, hey, we have a great outcome for this test, and then say, okay, cool, let's make the changes, and then have no budget to do so, right? So you have to keep all that downstream stuff in mind as well, I think, which is an important thing. So building frameworks around your testing capacity, I think, is important because it helps you to have that foresight in order to make sure you're prepared for whatever the outcomes are.
I want to dissect that a little bit more. And
Sure.
so going into testing and, your communication skills, and how, if you're a marketer, maybe your agency in-house and, you're in that first week of testing, the dashboard gets sent up to the CEO and he's like, what? Our CPL is 6 times the cost. And he hasn't been reading, the communication. And he starts freaking out because, you're going way over budget without understanding testing and all those things. And so what advice you have a marketer of how they can improve their communication, whether that's use cases CEO or just in general, being able to communicate with CFO, sales. So cross-departmentally, marketers can very much be effective in their role at the organization, how they're moving
Yeah,
forward.
uh, that's a great question too. And I would say there's two things. One is take leadership training.
Mhm.
Lots of people get promoted to leadership positions because they know how to do whatever whatever their expertise is, marketing, sales, customer service, it doesn't matter. But that doesn't mean that they know how to be a leader or a
Right.
manager of people, right? That is a completely different skill set. And most people just think you kind of inherit it or you learn as you go and it's okay. And a lot of people can be flamed out on the one really quickly, even though they're good at what they were, promoted to that position for, right? So I think you have to be intentional. If you want to take that next step to leadership, you should train on the principles of leadership. You should understand how to communicate with your team, and it's also communicating up and down the ladder, right? So if you're on a leadership team, how do you communicate with your partners versus how do you communicate with your internal team that may be working underneath you? Those are two different styles of communication that you have to learn. I think one of the important things I learned from this gentleman, Croy Bosch, that came in and did an executive leadership training where I was working, is that you can establish a communication code with different people at your organization. So you have a deep understanding of what is important to them and how they communicate versus how you communicate. And once you kind of establish that understanding, you're going to get much better results from when you have communication, right? It's intentionality in all of that. So the other part is storytelling, right? Not everybody's a good storyteller. There is tons of training out there on storytelling, which in almost any position, marketing, sales, whatever, if you are a really good storyteller, you're going to be better at your job anyway. You're going to be better at marketing. You're going to be better at closing sales. But there's also so much use in that when you're presenting a deck, a go-to-market strategy. You know what I mean? Like showing your KPIs and the results, and speaking to your audience in a way that's like, okay, here's my next slide, and people are bored to tears. You bring them into the story, and I think one of the most important things about that is you're almost like you're making your audience the hero. It's not about you, it's about them, and that's how they get engaged and they follow through better. And I love that, and that is something that I also trained and was intentional to learn. I worked with a guy named Stan Miller, who I think is also incredibly awesome. These are two guys that people listening to this want to look up: Croy Bosch or Stan Miller, or reach out to me and I'll put you in touch. Like they're great people to work with if you're trying to improve on those types of skills.
Uh, with storytelling, so I'm going to bring up something we talked about a few weeks ago before this podcast, and I know you're a soccer fanatic. It's on your website too. And so I love the storytelling that can go on in sports. And I'd love to hear from you, maybe an example pop culture wise. It doesn't have to be sports, just in general, of fantastic storytelling. It could be just a great Hulu show you've been watching and why that storytelling captivates you. And this is an intense issue for me. I'm using intense exaggerating as I'm from Pittsburgh. I'm a Pirates fan, and I hated their Michael Keaton video to start the season. I thought it was so. I personally thought it was terrible, as it was hammering things that were very inauthentic of how bad the Pirates have been my entire life, and it was like we always go back out there and we compete because we're the Pirates and this is what we do. And it just felt so weird, as they have 35-year track record of being the worst managed pro team in sports. And it really deflated my enthusiasm for the season. So love to hear, pop culture wise, what's an example of good or bad storytelling?
Are you talking about Michael Keaton? Batman is a Pirates fan? Just
Well,
making
he's
sure.
from Pittsburgh.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay, that's
Yes,
incredible. I've been to a Pirates game in my lifetime, actually. It's one of the ballparks I've made it to.
it's
Um,
beautiful.
Yeah, it's funny because I have a few teams that are just also torturous to be a fan of. The interesting storyline for me this year was so my favorite Premier League team is Tottenham, and they sold their best player, England's top goal scorer, Harry Kane, and everybody was like, they're gonna, and they had trouble finding a new manager, and they found a guy I wasn't very familiar with to take over. And it was like, okay, this is going to be a bad year. New manager, lost your best player. And they got off to an incredible start. Like they were undefeated a couple months into the season. And I was like, try not to get too excited about that, because the wheels did fall off, although a lot of that had to do with injuries, unfortunately, which will happen if you're not that deep. But it was a really compelling storyline because he essentially left to go win a title. He'd never won a title with my team. And he went to a team that just basically churns out titles in Germany year after year after year. And the first year he went there to just, hey, listen, I'm on your team. I'm going to get a title now. They are not going to win the title this year because some team in their division that has never, ever won before is having the most miraculous like season in Germany ever. Bayer Leverkusen. And so they're undefeated and the season's almost over, which is incredible. So I feel terribly bad for this guy. You can't see, but I actually have like a little Harry Kane Lego figure my wife got me up on my shelf over here because I was such a huge fan of his. So even though he left, I was like, I'm rooting for him, and it still didn't work out for him. The team is in almost a better place without him now, which is amazing to say. It's hard to say because yeah, I would kind of imagine if they kept him, they'd be better off. But um it's just it's a story that I think in both scenarios no one would have ever predicted, and it is super compelling for me personally to answer that question. But I think also for a lot of fans, like any German soccer fan, or just people watching Spurs play in England. I mean, they were transformed under this new manager, and that was really the key. They play a different style. It's way more exciting to watch, and even though they may lose here or there now, I'm like a fan again. Like I'm excited to watch them. Where in the past they were getting by. It was horrible soccer to watch. It hurt me. So
Is
yeah.
there anything about the Spurs marketing that you're trying to enjoy the game, but you're observing it and you go, oh, this could be a lot better?
No, I think they do a great job. And I'll tell you the reason I am a Spurs fan, if I really am honest with myself, going back to my childhood, is I started being a fan of them when I was a teenager. I mean, it was a really long time ago. I didn't become like a fair weather fan when they started getting some great players. I had been a fan of them way back. And the reason why I became a fan was I really liked their uniform choices when I
Mhm.
was a kid because my father was a coach and we would get Eurosport magazine, which became soccer.com. And Eurosport would sell, it had pictures. They had a couple of really exciting players in like the 80s. And every once in a while, MSG, because I lived in New York, would show like a weekly Premier League game. And because they had exciting players, they would be on TV. And I would see these uniforms in the magazine and on TV. And I just really, really loved their uniforms. So I bought it when I was at a soccer tournament. And Hummel, I think, was the man. It was like a brand that nobody really associates with soccer anymore, 20, 30 years later. But it was just really, really exciting to see. And so yeah, their marketing on their uniform did it for me way back when, and I've been a fan ever since.
I want to bring this, a little bit back to your client work as a fractional CMO, and I love to hear from you when you're operating as a fractional CMO. How do you measure success in your campaigns? What KPIs, what data do you look at?
Yeah, I think it depends on the goals that the organization has, right? So like a lot of people think marketing comes in and they will kickstart a demand generation strategy or a lead generation strategy. And really, especially for more sophisticated orgs, there's so much more that marketing can contribute to just that, right? They can contribute to revenue retention, reducing churn, and all of these other things that upsells, cross sells, advocacy, and all this stuff. And a lot of people don't think through that motion, especially in more of the startup capacity, with some of the clients that I work with. And so, when I walk in, it's really like you have to start with what is the company's goals first,
Mhm.
right? And then prioritize them. And then where can marketing have the biggest impact to help those goals be achieved? And it's not always demand gen or lead gen. Sometimes it is creating emotion to help on the other side of the funnel, right? Or the bow tie, I should say. And then let's say it is standard demand generation, which I have a lot of expertise in over the years, right? You still have to align and have an understanding of like, okay, it's all the standard stuff that you hear about, but I think that a lot of people don't spend enough time in the planning phase to understand who's your ICP, what motivates them,
Mhm.
like what is their emotional states, what are their logical states. A lot of psychology stuff I really like to get into more and
Mhm.
more now, and figuring out like how do you get in front of them with whatever your service or products, whatever. Um, in a way where you're helping them solve a problem, right? Like, and sometimes that problem is a desire, a motivation. It's not something you can just hand them, right? It's
Mhm.
you're a partner to them in some ways. And so just getting to the crux of that, I think, can really help shape what campaigns you launch and then what quantitative or qualitative data are you collecting in order to see if it's successful, right? Because you do need to measure both in a lot of ways, especially at the front of the funnel. And so that's how I do it. I like to backwards engineer a lot of stuff and start from the top and work your way down.
So, Michael, my last question today is if we're looking into the future in 2024, what's an area of marketing that you're excited about? And whether that's, new AI, a new SaaS product, getting back in real life for events, whatnot. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're excited about this year.
Yeah, I think AI is definitely at the front of it. Like I'm developing my own AI product right now in my spare time, because there's just so many possibilities and capabilities. And I think in ways that help people in a landscape where most people have reduced budgets, being honest, right? Can AI, smart AI, help people accomplish more things with less? I think definitely yes. Right. And so I'm developing something. I like also what gets me excited is working with some of the healthcare and health tech companies I'm working with that are also integrating AI in not in places, and this goes back when I was an agency, they're not always integrating AI in places that are going to replace jobs or something like that. They're putting it into places where they never have enough people to begin with, right? There's so much burnout now. Back in the day when I worked with a robotics automation company, and we were like, well, isn't the number one question, are these robots taking jobs out of people's hands? And it was like, no, these are the jobs nobody does anyway. Like we need to hire people and we literally can't, right? There's so much practical application for that. Like, and I know everybody gets scared, but there is, and I've heard this quote many times. I think that what's going to happen is that marketers that use AI smart are going to replace marketers that don't use AI at all. They're still going to be marketers, right? You're always going to have a need, especially for a personal connection and advisor and things like that, people to do the execution. But the people that are learning AI and doing it with AI now are going to be doing it faster, cheaper, better, long term. And so I think that's where everybody has to make sure that they're intentional about spending their time in AI and getting better at it. Yeah.
So, Michael, if someone was inspired by this conversation, they want to learn more about you, your organization, can you share any links, social media handles, best ways to follow up with you?
Yeah, my LinkedIn is Michael Thomas Dillon. I have a website I'm actually redoing called askmichaeldillon.com, which links to my LinkedIn, and it links to people just if they want to ask me a question or just book time on my calendar. I think my calendar is actually also on my LinkedIn profile as well. So happy to connect with other people that need help or just marketers that want to chit chat or learn from each other. I love growing my network with other people in that way. So.
Perfect, Michael. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andrew.